For centuries, the Odyssey has been the foundational text of Western literature, traditionally understood as a rugged, hyper-masculine epic. We are told it was composed by the blind genius Homer to chronicle a war hero's struggle against monsters and gods. But in 1897, a prominent Victorian scholar named Samuel Butler published a translation that came with a radical, unsettling theory. Butler argued that Homer never touched this poem. Based on a close reading of the text, he claimed the epic was actually written 250 years later by a brilliant young woman. He traced the author to a specific house in the city of Trapani, on the west coast of Sicily. Butler believed she lived there, mapping the local geography to describe everything from the islands of the Phaeacians to the jagged cliffs of Ithaca. He described the epic as a Frankenstein's monster, two completely distinct original poems that had been stitched together, leaving the seams visible to anyone willing to look. To test this claim, we have to look at the internal logic of the opening chapters. If we strip away the traditional assumptions, the text begins to describe a world that looks very different from a standard war epic. Butler's theory starts with the poem's anatomy. He argued the text is a graft of two separate works, an original story about the return of Ulysses and a domestic poem about Penelope. The glitch hides in the first book. The narrator explicitly asks the muse to sing of the hero who sacked Troy, but then immediately abandons him. For the first 4 massive books of his own story, the title character is completely missing. Odysseus is a ghost in his own narrative. Instead of following a soldier, the audience is dropped into a family drama. We spend hours with his son, Telemachus, a young man watching a mob of greedy houseguests slowly devour his inheritance. This narrative gap creates a strange tension. By delaying the hero's arrival for thousands of lines, the poem forces the audience to focus entirely on the domestic crisis left in the wake of the war. In these opening books, the traditional hallmarks of war vanish. The characters don't resolve their conflicts through physical combat. Their weapons are intellect, social manipulation, and long-term planning. The plot only moves forward because of female agency. It is the goddess Athena who disguises herself to goad Telemachus into action, providing the spark that the men in the story lack. Then there is Penelope, who manages a brilliant, non-violent resistance against the men occupying her home. She holds them off for 3 years with a simple loom. She spends each day weaving a burial shroud for her father-in-law, and every night, by torchlight, she secretly unpicks the stitches, effectively freezing the timeline of her suitors. When the story moves to Sparta in Book 4, we find Menelaus, one of the greatest heroes of the Trojan War, completely paralyzed by grief and unable to lead. Helen takes command. She uses Egyptian drugs to spike the men's wine and stop their mourning, then masterfully steers the conversation to achieve her own ends. In this portion of the epic, women and goddesses are the masterminds. They pull the strings of men who are often too traumatized or too arrogant to realize they aren't in charge. Modern classicists universally reject Butler's literal theory. There is no historical evidence of a specific young woman in Trapani composing the poem. But even if he was historically wrong, Butler's observation about the nature of the text remains accurate. Viewing the poem through his lens stops us from treating these chapters as a boring prologue. It reveals them as a masterpiece about the quiet power dynamics of a home in crisis. The story hinges on property rights, the threat of home invasion, and a son's paralyzing insecurity about a father who is essentially a ghost. The Odyssey remains a foundation of Western culture for its depiction of quiet, grueling endurance. These opening chapters honor the courage required to hold a broken home together while the rest of the world waits for it to fail.